Stay calm, I won't let it hurt you.
The Roman arena was not just a place for games. It was a place where life and death stood face to face. It was a stage where blood became entertainment, and where the crowd decided who lived and who died. The story begins long before the famous Colosseum was built. In early Rome, funeral ceremonies sometimes included combat between slaves. These fights were meant to honor the dead. Families believed that blood sacrifice showed respect to powerful ancestors. Over time, these small fights grew bigger. What began as private ritual slowly became public entertainment. Roman leaders saw something important in these fights. They saw that the people loved them. As the Roman Republic grew stronger, politicians started organizing larger games to win public support. Free food and exciting violence kept the population happy. This idea later became known as bread and circuses. If the people were entertained, they were less likely to complain about politics. When the Roman Empire rose to power, the games became even grander. Emperors used arena spectacles to show strength. A powerful emperor needed a powerful display. The arena was the perfect stage. The most famous arena was the Colosseum in Rome. It could hold around 50,000 spectators. Its massive stone walls and complex underground tunnels showed Roman engineering skill. Beneath the arena floor were cages for animals, rooms for fighters, and machinery to lift beasts into the sunlight. When the crowd entered, excitement filled the air. People from all social classes sat in different sections. The emperor had the best seat. Senators and nobles sat close to the action. Poor citizens filled the upper levels. The games often lasted for days. They began in the morning with animal hunts. At midday came executions. In the afternoon, gladiator battles took place. Each part was carefully organized to keep the crowd engaged. The arena floor was covered in sand. The sand absorbed blood. Workers raked it smooth between fights. The bright sunlight reflected off weapons and armor. For the Roman people, these games were normal. Children grew up watching violence. Families attended together. The sound of cheering echoed against stone walls. But behind the beauty of architecture was a dark reality. Many of the fighters were slaves, prisoners of war, or criminals. They did not choose this life. They were forced into it. The arena represented Roman values. Strength, courage, discipline, and dominance were praised. Weakness meant death. As Rome expanded, it brought back exotic animals from conquered lands. Lions from Africa, tigers from Asia, bears from Europe. The empire's size became part of the show. The arena proved that Rome controlled the world. Yet these games were expensive. Only the richest leaders could afford them. Funding games became a way to gain political support. The bigger the spectacle, the greater the popularity. In Tees' world, mercy was rare. The crowd often shouted for blood. A defeated gladiator might look to the emperor for a signal. A single gesture could decide his fate. The arena was not just about violence. It was about power. It showed that Rome ruled both man and nature. It showed that the emperor held life and death in his hand. But the birth of the arena was only the beginning. The real horror lay in the lives of the men forced to fight. In the next part, we will enter the training schools of gladiators. We will see how ordinary men were turned into fighters, how they lived, and how they prepared to face death under the eyes of thousands. The games were brutal, but for those inside the arena, survival was everything. Behind the loud cheers of the Roman arena stood a hidden world of fear, discipline, and endless training. Before a gladiator stepped onto the sand, he lived a life that few people in the crowd ever saw. Most gladiators did not choose this path. Many were prisoners of war, taken from lands Rome had conquered. Others were slaves sold by traders. Some were criminals sentenced to fight as punishment. There were even a few free men who volunteered, hoping for fame or money. But they were rare. Once selected, these men were sent to special training schools called Ludi. These schools were run by a manager known as the Lanista. The Lanista owned the gladiators like property. He invested money in their food, training, and medical care. Because a strong fighter meant profit. Life inside the ludus was strict. The gladiators lived in small cells, often locked at night. Guards watched them carefully to prevent escape. Although they were slaves or prisoners, they were valuable. A trained gladiator could bring great wealth to his owner. Training was intense. Every day, fighters practiced with wooden swords and shields that were heavier than real weapons. This built strength and endurance. They struck wooden posts again and again, learning how to attack and defend. Instructors were often former gladiators who had survived many fights. They understood the arena. They knew how quickly a small mistake could lead to death. They trained the men not only to fight, but to entertain. Yes, entertainment was important. The crowd wanted drama. A slow, boring fight disappointed them. Gladiators learned to move with style. They learned how to build tension, how to fall, how to rise again. The arena was a deadly stage. There were different types of gladiators. Each had special armor and weapons. The Mirmillo carried a large shield and a short sword. He wore a heavy helmet with a fish-shaped crest. The Racieris fought differently. He carried a net and a trident. He wore less armor and relied on speed. His goal was to trap his opponent with the net before striking. The Secutor was designed to fight the Rish. His smooth helmet prevented the net from catching easily. There were also Thracians, heavily armed fighters, and many other styles. Each match was carefully planned. Opponents were chosen to create balance and excitement. Although fights were violent, not every battle ended in death. Training gladiators was expensive. Owners preferred fighters to survive multiple men. A wounded gladiator could be healed and fight again. Doctors were present in the arena. Roman medicine was advanced for its time. Some gladiators received better medical care than ordinary citizens because they were valuable assets, yet survival was never guaranteed. A deep wound could mean slow death from infection. A mistake could end a career instantly. Before each fight, gladiators waited in underground chambers beneath the arena. They could hear the roar of the crowd above them. The sound must have been overwhelming. Some men prayed. Others remained silent. Fear was real, even for the bravest fighters. When their turn came, they were lifted into the sunlight. The crowd saw shining armor and strong bodies. They did not see the sleepless nights or the pain of training. Once the fight began, everything moved quickly. The clash of metal echoed across the stone seats. The smell of sweat and sand filled the air. Blood darkened the ground. If one gladiator fell, he might raise a finger asking for mercy. At that moment the crowd played a role. Spectators shouted their wishes. The emperor or game sponsor made the final decision. Mercy or death. The famous gesture of the thumb is often misunderstood today, but the idea remains the same. The ruler decided. For the gladiator, each fight carried both danger and opportunity. Victory brought rewards. Some received money. Some gained fame. Successful fighters became heroes among the people. Women admired them. Their names were written on walls as graffiti. There were even rare cases where a gladiator won freedom. After many victories, he might receive a wooden sword called a rudis. This symbol meant he was released from slavery. He had survived the arena. But freedom did not erase trauma. Years of violence left scars on body and mind. Not all arena fighters were trained gladiators. Some were condemned criminals with no training at all. These men faced almost certain death. They were sent into the arena as part of executions. Compared to trained gladiators, these prisoners had little chance. Their suffering added another layer of cruelty to the games. Still, the crowd returned again and again. They cheered bravery. They admired skill. They loved spectacle. For Romans, the arena represented strength. It showed that Rome was fearless. It showed that death itself could be controlled and displayed. But gladiator battles were only one part of the arena's brutality. In the next part, we will enter an even darker scene. The animal hunts and public executions that shocked even some ancient observers. Wild beasts, chained prisoners, and staged horrors created moments that were beyond imagination. The arena was not just about combat between men. It was about domination over nature and human life itself. If gladiator battles were violent, the next part of the Roman arena was even more terrifying. These were the animal hunts and public executions, spectacles designed not only to entertain, but to shock and frighten. The morning events in the arena were called Venationes, which means wild beast hunts. At first, these hunts showed skilled fighters battling dangerous animals. But over time they became massive displays of slaughter. Rome ruled lands across Africa, Asia, and Europe. From these regions, soldiers and traders captured exotic animals, lions from North Africa, tigers from the east, leopards, bears, wolves, and even elephants. These animals were transported long distances to be killed for sport. Beneath the arena floor were dark cages and narrow tunnels. The animals waited in confusion and fear. When the time came, lifts and trapdoors brought them suddenly into the bright arena. The crowd roared at the sight. Some hunts involved trained animal fighters who used spears and bows. These men were skilled and sometimes admired, almost like gladiators. But many hunts were less equal. Sometimes prisoners or untrained criminals were pushed into the arena without proper weapons. They faced hungry animals with little chance of survival. The crowd watched as fear turned into chaos. One of the most brutal forms of execution was called damnatio ad bestias, meaning condemnation to the beasts. This was not a fight, it was a death sentence. Criminals, prisoners of war, rebels, and sometimes early Christians were sentenced this way. They were tied to stakes or left defenseless. Then wild animals were released. The purpose was not only execution, it was humiliation and terror. The message was clear. Defy Rome, and this is your fate. The crowd reacted differently depending on the situation. Some cheered loudly, others were silent, watching with cold curiosity. For many Romans, these scenes were normal parts of entertainment. Executions were sometimes designed to copy myths. A condemned person might be dressed as a character from a famous story. For example, someone could be forced to act as a mythological hero and then be killed in a way that matched the legend. This turned death into theater. These performances mixed cruelty with creativity. Elaborate sets were built. Fake forests or rocky landscapes were created in the arena. Machines lifted animals into view. The Romans loved spectacle. But behind the dramatic design was real suffering. Animals were often starved before the event to make them more aggressive. The roar of the crowd confused and frightened them. They attacked wildly. Some emperors made the games even more extreme to impress the public. Large numbers of animals were killed in a single day. Historical records describe thousands of beasts slaughtered during grand festivals. The scale was enormous. Not only humans suffered, entire populations of wild animals were reduced because of these games. Some species nearly disappeared from certain regions. The arena became a symbol of total control. Rome showed that it could dominate nature itself. No creature was beyond its power. At midday, after the animal hunts, executions often took place. This timing was deliberate. The crowd that came for excitement now witnessed punishment. It reminded them of the consequences of crime. Unlike gladiator battles, executions had no glory. There was no chance of fame or reward. Only fear and death. Some condemned prisoners begged for mercy. Others faced death silently. A few fought back, even against impossible odds. Their bravery sometimes earned brief respect from the crowd, yet the system remained cruel. The arena turned suffering into public display. Why did Romans accept this? Part of the answer lies in culture. Roman society valued strength and discipline. Showing mercy to enemies was sometimes seen as weakness. The empire had grown through war. Violence was familiar. The arena also distracted people from daily struggles. Poor citizens received free entry to games. Food was distributed. In a city with huge population and unemployment, entertainment helped prevent unrest. Emperors understood this clearly. A successful festival increased popularity. A disappointed crowd could become dangerous. So the spectacles grew larger, more dramatic, more shocking, but not everyone approved. Some Roman writers criticized the games. They described the crowd becoming cruel, losing compassion. They warned that constant exposure to violence damaged the human spirit. Despite criticism, the games continued for centuries. The combination of animal hunts and executions created a cycle of fear and fascination. The arena was not only about watching death, it was about feeling power over it. For the victims, there was no escape. For the audience, there was excitement mixed with horror. Yet even these brutal displays were not the most extreme events Rome ever staged. In the next part, we will explore the most shocking spectacles of all. Massive slaughter events recreated naval battles inside the arena, and festivals so large that historians still struggle to believe the numbers. The brutality of Rome's games went beyond simple combat. As brutal as gladiator fights and animal hunts were, Rome did not stop there. The hunger for spectacle grew bigger with every generation. Emperors competed with one another to create events so shocking that people would never forget them. The arena became a place where imagination mixed with cruelty on a massive scale. One of the most unbelievable spectacles ever organized was the staged naval battle, known as a nomic. In these events, large areas were flooded with water to recreate sea battles. Ships were built, prisoners were placed inside them, and real combat took place. Some of these naval battles were not even held inside the Colosseum, but in specially dug basins or natural lakes prepared for the show. Thousands of men were forced to fight as if they were real soldiers at war. But unlike real soldiers, these men had no honor to win and no country to defend. They were mostly prisoners and condemned criminals. The ships collided. Arrows flew. Men fell into the water, weighed down by armor. Many drowned. Others were cut down by swords. The crowd watched from safe seats, amazed at the scale of destruction. Imagine the effort required to create such an event. Water systems had to be controlled. Ships had to be built. Fighters had to be trained just enough to make the battle look real. All of this was done for entertainment. Some emperors used these naval games to celebrate military victories. It was propaganda made into performance. Rome showed its power not only on real battlefields but inside its arenas. There were also mass execution events, so large that ancient writers described them with shock. During special festivals, hundreds or even thousands of animals and prisoners could die in a single celebration. One emperor, seeking popularity, organized games that lasted for months. Every day brought new killings. The scale of bloodshed was enormous. The arena sand had to be replaced often because it became too soaked with blood. Another disturbing practice involved mythological reenactments. Prisoners were forced to act out famous stories from Roman legends. For example, someone might be dressed as a mythical character who was punished by the gods. Instead of fake stage effects, the punishment was real. If a legend described a character being burned, the prisoner could actually be burned. If the myth ended in attack by wild animals, that attack truly happened. The crowd understood the story. They knew the ending, but they still watched, perhaps with mixed feelings of excitement and horror. This blending of theater and execution made the arena different from any modern entertainment. It was not only violence, it was storytelling through death. There were even events where the arena floor was decorated like a forest or desert landscape. Painted scenery and real plants created the illusion of distant lands. Exotic animals were released into this artificial world, only to be hunted down. The message was clear. Rome controlled the world. It could bring Africa, Asia, and distant mountains into one stadium and conquer them again. But as spectacles grew larger, so did moral questions. Some Roman philosophers began to criticize the games openly. They argued that constant exposure to blood made people cruel. They said that watching suffering without compassion damaged the soul. Still, most citizens continued attending. For many, the arena was a rare escape from daily struggle. It provided excitement in a world where life was often hard and short. The emperors understood this psychology well. If the people were entertained, they were less likely to rebel. Grand games distracted them from political problems and economic hardship. Yet behind the bright decorations and loud cheers was a darker truth. Every grand spectacle required victims. Prisoners from wars filled the arena. Slaves were purchased in large numbers. Criminal sentences grew harsher to supply bodies for execution. Violence became part of the system. Even gladiators, admired by the crowd, were trapped inside it. A famous fighter could gain glory, but one mistake ended everything. The scale of some events is difficult to imagine today. Ancient writers recorded festivals where over 5,000 animals were killed in a single series of games. These were not quick deaths. Many animals suffered in confusion and pain. Rome's appetite for spectacle seemed endless, but no empire lasts forever. As centuries passed, changes began to weaken the arena tradition. Economic problems made huge games harder to fund. Religious beliefs slowly shifted. Christianity, which once supplied victims for the arena, began spreading through the empire. Christian leaders spoke against the games. They argued that human life was sacred. Gradually, public opinion began to change. By the 4th and 5th centuries, the grand spectacles started to fade. Gladiator fights became less common. Animal hunts continued for some time, but even they eventually declined. The great Colosseum, once filled with roaring crowds, slowly fell silent. In the final part, we will explore why these brutal games lasted so long, what they reveal about human nature, and what lessons we can learn from Rome's arena today. Because the story of the arena is not only about ancient Rome, it is about power, entertainment, and the choices societies make when violence becomes spectacle. As the centuries passed, the roar of the Roman arena slowly began to fade. But before it disappeared, it left behind an important question. Why did these brutal games last for so long? The answer is not simple. The arena survived for hundreds of years because it served many purposes at the same time. It was entertainment. It was political propaganda. It was social control. And it was a symbol of Roman identity. For the average Roman citizen, life was difficult. Cities like Rome were crowded. Many people were poor. Jobs were not always stable. Disease spread easily. In such conditions, large public games provided escape. They offered excitement and distraction from daily struggles. The government understood this very well. Emperors knew that keeping the population entertained helped maintain peace. When people gathered in the arena, cheering together, they felt united. Their anger and frustration were directed toward the spectacle instead of the rulers. The arena also showed power in a very clear way. Every time a wild animal was killed, Rome demonstrated control over distant lands. Every time a prisoner was executed, Rome showed what happened to enemies and criminals. Every time a gladiator fought bravely, Roman values of strength and courage were celebrated. Violence became a message. It said that Rome was strong, fearless, and unstoppable. But slowly, changes began to weaken this tradition. One major change was economic. Organizing large games was extremely expensive. Exotic animals had to be captured and transported across great distances. Gladiators had to be trained and fed. Massive structures, like the Colosseum, required constant maintenance. As the empire faced financial problems and military threats, spending huge amounts on games became harder to justify. Resources were needed elsewhere. Another powerful change came from religion. Christianity, once persecuted in the arena, grew stronger over time. Christian leaders taught that all human life had value. They condemned the killing of prisoners and gladiators for entertainment. When Emperor Constantine accepted Christianity in the 4th century, the cultural atmosphere began to shift. Although games did not stop immediately, support for them slowly declined. Some Christian writers described the arena as morally dangerous. They argued that watching violence made people cruel and insensitive. They believed that constant exposure to blood damaged the soul. Over time, more citizens began to question the games. What once seemed normal began to feel disturbing. By the late Roman Empire, gladiator fights became rare. The final recorded gladiator games in Rome are believed to have taken place in the early 5th century. Animal hunts continued a bit longer, but they too eventually ended. The Colosseum, once full of noise and movement, became quiet. Earthquakes damaged its walls. Stones were removed and reused in other buildings. Nature slowly reclaimed parts of it. Today, visitors walk through its ruins in silence. It is hard to imagine the screams, cheers, and chaos that once filled the space. The story of Rome's arena reveals something deep about human nature. People are often drawn to spectacle. They are fascinated by danger, competition, and survival. Even in modern times, entertainment sometimes includes violence, though not to the same deadly extent. The difference is that modern society has built laws and ethics to protect human life. In ancient Rome, those protections were limited, especially for slaves and prisoners. The arena also shows how power can shape culture. When leaders promote certain forms of entertainment, they influence what people accept as normal. If cruelty is celebrated, it becomes easier to ignore suffering. Yet, the end of the games also gives hope. It shows that values can change. What one generation accepts, another can reject. The brutal games of Rome remind us that civilization is not only about buildings and armies. It is also about compassion. True strength is not only shown in dominance, but in mercy. When we look back at the arena, we see both human creativity and human cruelty. The engineering was impressive. The organization was complex, but the cost was measured in lives, human and animal. Thousands of gladiators fought under the shadow of the Colosseum. Many died unknown. Prisoners were executed to send political messages. Animals were slaughtered to entertain crowds. The sand absorbed their blood, but history remembers their suffering. The ruins that remain today stand as silent witnesses. They remind us of a time when death was a performance and survival was a show. In the end, the Roman arena was more than a place of games. It was a mirror reflecting the values, fears, and ambitions of an empire. And perhaps the most important lesson is this: whenever entertainment depends on suffering, society must ask difficult questions. Rome once believed the arena showed its greatness. Today, we look back and see a warning.